everyone. Welcome to the Economic Development Innovation Committee meeting. We are going to continue our work on the public realm study. Looks like today we're going to be talking about city-initiated the Parklet construction program. So I will turn it over to Mr. Raleigh.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Melton, and good afternoon, members of the committee. We will be focusing today exclusively on a Parklet construction program. So before I turn it over to Whitney Schoenfeld and Michael Moore to give you more details on that program, I did just want to take a moment to acknowledge a few memos that were attached to today's agenda that contain some good information. We have a memo that responds to a request I know that came from Mayor Baldwin related to outdoor dining on Ncdot maintained streets. So Michael Moore and his team have prepared a memo that provides some pretty good explanation as to the issues associated there and presents a path forward. Well, we also have a memo from the team that is working on programming and activations to provide you with some updates on some new events that have taken place that were recommended as part of the public realm study. And then we also have a brief update to share related to the small scale activation grant funding that Council awarded several weeks ago to promote small scale activations with small organizers. So did just want to make sure that that information was highlighted. But without further ado, I will go ahead and turn things over to Whitney Schoenfeld in Emergency Management and Special Events to get us started.
Thank you, Evan, and good afternoon. Once again, we are here today to talk about outdoor seating. And so just to provide a bit of background again for those that may be joining in who haven't followed along as our progression with the public realm study, this slide here just shows the previous meetings that we've presented on different topics. And then again, today's discussion is limited to outdoor seating. So it wouldn't be a public realm presentation if I didn't start off with a little definitions lesson from yours truly, again, for those who may be tuning in who aren't familiar with the different terminology we use for outdoor seating. So the first one on here is a parklet. And what a parklet does is it converts on-street parking spaces into lively, open community spaces, much like a park, where it is open to the public at all times. The next one on here is a streetery, and this is the newer term to many of us. And this is where we are, again, using on-street parking spaces, but we are converting those into a space for a business to extend its footprint into the public right-of-way. And it is available to the patrons of that business during its hours of operations. And when that business might be closed, it essentially just extends the sidewalk. And then the last term on here is a pedlet. So once again, it's using on-street parking spaces, but this is when we are converting the flow of pedestrian traffic from the sidewalk into the parking space, which allows the business to expand on the sidewalk. And once again, I will mention that a pedlet is not our preferred method moving forward, just due to accessibility concerns with individuals who may be in a wheelchair or those who are visually impaired trying to traverse our streets and sidewalks. All right, so as a reminder, the current program as it stands under the COVID pandemic, where we were able to ease outdoor seating restrictions, we have 7 streeteries and 2 pedlets. And prior to the easing of restrictions, we had 2 parklets, and those are Deco and Virgil's. So our office, we continue to be in contact with many of these businesses who have expanded their outdoor seating, letting them know of changes when we changed the deadline for when they're allowed to use these spaces, about the orange and white jersey barriers that they're able to get, and what our plans are moving forward and what their plans are for moving forward as well, if this is still something that they want to be a part of. And as a reminder to everyone, we did extend the deadline for these outdoor seating extensions to the end of the year, and then we waived fees for the remainder of the fiscal year. So the new enhancement that you all may have heard of because you already approved some funding for us, our big idea was to take the burden and cost off of our businesses and have the city work to program, build, construct actual streeteries for our businesses to utilize. So they don't have to worry about finding a contractor, finding the funding to do this. So we want to take that burden on in order to help support our local businesses. So what our idea is to work with a contractor where the city will essentially install the platform, the walls, and the wheel stops. And wheel stops are the mechanism to prevent a vehicle from getting too close to a streetery. And then the businesses can supplement these structures with tables, chairs, plants, other kind of decor items in order to customize the streetery to their own business needs. And to be eligible to be a part of this program, you must use the public right of way and obviously be permitted by our office. So essentially, we aren't going to be building streeteries in privately owned parking lots. So funding opportunities. So I know this was a question raised previously. And as again, thank you to all of you and the full council for approving $500,000 from the American Rescue Plan to move forward with this initiative. And right now we are actively working on how to legally procure the funding or how to move forward with purchasing these streeteries. As I think many of us and many of our businesses are aware of, when you have federal money, there's a lot of stipulations on how to use that money. So we want to be careful that we are doing that in the right way so we can all avoid any misappropriation of federal funds. But if you ask when we expect to have that completed, we certainly are just as motivated as our businesses to have this done prior to the extension, which ends December 31st of this year. I do want to highlight our partners with the Downtown Raleigh Alliance, who also did a grant program earlier on with Duke Energy. They did the Storefront Revitalization Grant, which extended funding for businesses for outdoor seating as well as other items. And many of our current outdoor seating permit holders were able to take advantage of that program and secure funding. Any business that did that, if they got funding for something specific like tables and chairs from the DRA, that's something that they couldn't get funding for from us because that was already paid for. So they would have to have something else that they didn't get funds for if they wanted to go about it that way. And then for anybody who doesn't necessarily want a streetery built by the city, we are still exploring additional funding opportunities with budget and management services, but a funding source has not yet been identified. So moving on, another question raised, and Evan mentioned this too, was about DOT streets and where we can accommodate outdoor seating on streets that are maintained by Ncdot. So this map here outlines some of the Ncdot streets in our downtown areas in red, and then the remainder of those streets are city streets, which are blue. So I'll highlight just some of the red ones you see on here in case people can't see it clearly, is Dawson, McDowell, Blunt, Person, Edenton, and Morgan, which then becomes New Bern. And I will mention that our office has not received any requests from businesses along these streets for outdoor seating extensions. We do have a few that have sidewalk seating along Blunt, but other than that, no one has requested to do a streetery, but we would be happy to entertain those applicants. This next slide here goes more into depth about Ncdot. And again, all of this is highlighted in that memo that is also shared in case anyone needs additional context. But basically, Ncdot allows local municipalities to enter into agreement for sidewalk seating. There are some requirements in place as far as safety and how far someone can be from a travel lane. It also does require that the city of Raleigh adopt an ordinance relating to this agreement, which we have done and is currently in city code. And then some of those limiting factors I mentioned are distance from travel lane, the speed limit on certain roads. And so what this shows here is that tables and chairs have to be 6 feet from a travel lane. So that does essentially eliminate using a streetery where people, again, are in the street because they don't want them right next to that travel lane. But it does present the option to do sidewalk seating and potentially doing a pedlet in the street. So in order to go about this, NCDOT also does require permission from the Federal Highway Administration for use of federal aid routes. And all of the streets previously mentioned that are also in the memo are federal aid routes. They do require fair market value if we are to use these streets for purposes other than transportation, which would include outdoor seating. What they have done amidst the COVID-19 pandemic is make exceptions to rules. So they are waiving some of these requirements for a limited amount of time to be used for sidewalk seating. So there is documentation that the city could share with NCDOT if a business who is on an NCDOT street would like to pursue an opportunity like this. After a certain amount of time, NCDOT does require fair market value to be reimbursed for use of these streets. All right, so next steps, exciting news is that we have finalized design standards from the Urban Design Center, where we have layouts and drawings and scaled measurements and a process for how people can build their own streetery if they don't want to go the route of what we're doing. So if somebody wants a custom streetery on their own that doesn't fit the mold like everyone else, they do have that option available to them if they want to pursue that. As I mentioned earlier, we are again working through how to legally procure moving forward with these streeteries while using the federal funds that are established under the American Rescue Plan Act. Our plan is for transportation to manage the contract with whoever would build these streeteries, and then our office would remain that single point of contact for businesses who want to go through this process. I will give a plug to the Stroll the Streets event this weekend. The Urban Design Center is going to have a prototype streetery on display. They decided to move forward with that actually before we had our own idea to build these streeteries. So while it will follow the design standards and it's still a good reference point for businesses that may be interested can go and see it, it won't be the exact model that we end up building, but they will end up being very similar. So people are certainly encouraged to go to that event and check out all of the options available and programming that will be there, which will also include that streetery prototype. And then we're also actively working with the city attorney's office to figure out what an agreement would look like with a business who wants to be a part of this city-led streetery initiative. And then depending on your feedback on all of this, we would ultimately need to amend city code, which again, we would work with the city attorney's office to do. And we would want to do that by your December city council meeting so we can implement changes by January 1st. Again, since this current extension ends at the end of this year. So with any ordinance changes that you all may want to do, fees would obviously ultimately come along with the streeteries in the future. Again, we are mindful of our businesses that have been struggling throughout the pandemic. So what we have proposed is kind of a phased in approach. And we've actively been working with staff from transportation, planning and development, and real estate to come up with what these fees would eventually look like. So what we are proposing is year one, somebody wants to build a streetery, we would have a $150 application fee, and that would essentially be it. We realize that if somebody wants to pursue a streetery, the investment on the business is already going to be great. So we don't want to charge them any more than $150. So that includes use of the parking space, a site inspection, that includes everything. And then year two, we would look at a reduced encumbrance fee. So whatever the ultimate price might be, year two, we would only want to charge them half of that rate. And that again would include renewal for use of the space and site inspection. And then year three and beyond, hopefully we would all be past this pandemic and businesses are back on their feet. And that would include a 100% encumbrance fee at that point. And again, that would include renewal of the space and any site inspection. So, yes.
Could you be more specific on what that cost would be?
So-
50% and 100%, please?
Yes, so we haven't fully finalized it, but what we are thinking is that the 50% rate would be an annual fee of $1,500. And then for the 100% fee, it would be an annual fee of $3,000. And that is by looking at benchmarking and figuring out our right-of-way calculator. So it is on par with what other cities are doing. I think other cities are also actively working out how to help our businesses, but how to ultimately charge money at some point as well.
I'm just going to say, after talking to restaurant owners who are 9 months behind in their rent, this isn't something that's going to be done in a year. I think that could be exorbitant, but I'll wait till the presentation is complete. Thank you.
Sure. So again, the earliest an applicant would see a fee would not be until fiscal year 2023. And then when we would ultimately want that 100% encumbrance fee that we're proposing would be fiscal year 2025. But again, that is obviously open to feedback and adjustments. And with that, I will take any questions.
John,
No,
we
looks
can't.
like you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Before we take questions, I know Bill King with the Downtown Raleigh Alliance is on the phone, so I'd like to let him weigh in with his suggestions, and that may help frame our discussion a little bit better. So Bill, I know you had some thoughts before the presentation. Having seen the presentation, can you please just go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would say, first off, huge thank you to the staff. There's been a tremendous amount of thought into the Streetery program. And so I just want to give a big thank you to Whitney and her team, Michael and his team, and the Urban Design Center, who I think have just done a great job, really working hard on the standards and figuring out a way to do this creatively. So first off, big thank you to them. And, you know, this is a conversation we've had with staff has been making sure that as this rolls out, the big thing is being really clear with the steps for our businesses, since they're ultimately not urban designers. And so this is all sort of new stuff for them and kind of out of field for them. So as much as possible, the design standards and the process for getting a streetery or getting extended outdoor dining being really, really clear and thoughtful so that, you know, if you qualify for a streetery, here's those steps. If you don't, here's the steps for sidewalk dining. If you're on an Ncdot street, here's the steps. It just really reduces the anxiety for them, makes it a lot easier for them to understand. And so that's something we've had a conversation with staff on, but something I'd reiterate is that opportunity would be really, really important for businesses to have that. And we're happy to bring in some of those businesses to take a look at that, to give that feedback, to make sure it does translate. Because I know it's, you know, we're sort of translating complex regulations to businesses and making sure that they can comply. But that would be my biggest piece of feedback, is making sure that this all rolls out in one comprehensive package and is the guidance is digestible.
Thank you. Is my microphone working? Okay. I saw hands. Let's start with Councilmember Branch, and then I saw Councilmember Knight's hand as well. Go ahead, Councilmember Branch.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I think, you know, hearing what that fee is at 50% and 100% is very important. But I want to make sure that I'm clear. That fee is just for an Ncdot street in which someone wants to do a streetery. Is that for any street for a streetery?
It would be for any street.
Okay. Okay. So that's helpful for me. And my second question with that answer is, if we were to not charge that full amount, how would we cover this cost 3 to 4 years from now? Evan or Michael or whomever who wants to jump in, you know, because that's I'm just saying, because I understand the mayor's point, but at the same time, I'm trying to figure out how does the fee get paid if it's not by the user of the streetery?
Well, I will try to take a stab at the response to that, Councilman Branch, and I would welcome my colleagues to weigh in and jump in if I miss anything here. But I think firstly, there's a philosophical question about the charge in the first place, and I just want to put it out there because we've had this conversation on staff. I think philosophically, the purpose for the charge is really we're talking about private uses of public space, and so. From a philosophical perspective, I think we're coming from a place that recognizing that this is going to be essentially dedicated exclusively for the benefit of a private establishment that's designed to make money, that there should be, in taking away some public uses of those spaces, that there would be some level of compensation to the city for that. So that's the philosophically why the fee structure is there. And then in terms of how it is, what that number actually is, unlike some programs, I don't think we have built this around a particular cost recovery model. Because, aside from the staff and time involved in processing an application, there really isn't specifically any specific cost that we're looking to recover as a part of this. So it's really kind of to Whitney's point made earlier in the presentation, the way that we had placed that fee structure is looking at, again, a review of peer cities. What is the typical cost that's charged associated with this type of use of public space? And so that is what we are evaluating to determine what an appropriate fee structure might look like for such a program. So it's really not based on a cost recovery model per se. That answers your
Can I jump
question.
in on this real quick? I have a follow-up question, unless Councilmember Branch, do you have something?
I had one follow-up question.
All right, go ahead.
And the follow-up question is, on average, because I know nothing's exact, how much do 2 parking spaces bring in a given year?
So I have the numbers for what an annual fee would be for a parklet for parking spaces. So the cost to encumber a parking space without charging a fee of using this, the cost to encumber it is about $9,600 if we factor in the right-of-way calculator and the amount to encumber a parking space.
Wow. Okay.
Councilor Branch, I know you also, I think that the question that you asked is something that we also did look at as part of evaluation. I'll ask maybe Michael Moore. If you happen to have that information about what a typical on-street parking space downtown, I think that's getting at your question, what a typical revenue generation for one of these spaces would be. Michael, do you happen to have any commentary on that question?
I don't know what a typical space cost recovery would be. A number around $4,600 seems to ring a bell to me.
Okay.
But I'll have to do a little follow up on that and double check, and I'll be happy to do that. I can tell you a little bit about how the number was originally calculated that Whitney kind of alluded to. It is looking at real estate costs, kind of a per foot or per acre cost subdivided, and then discounted by virtue of the fact that it is right of way and not like real property. So it was a number that was derived kind of basically using the real estate value and backed into that. And Ncdot would likely use a very similar approach. And of course, that's going to vary considerably whether or not it's a fair market value for, say, a street in, let's just pick like maybe Briar Creek in that area versus a downtown. So.
Thank you.
I just want to jump in. I feel like we're only getting half of the equation, sort of speak here, because when I look at these figures, first of all, the information we've received is that, and I don't remember which presentation we got this from, but that they expect a full economic recovery around 2025. So this would align with 100% of the fees being paid when the experts anticipate 100% economic recovery. That piece doesn't bother me so much. But what I'm trying to understand is $3,000 a year, that's $250 a month. What do the businesses, how does that work in their profit margin, right? And I understand that if someone is using a space that was previously generating revenue, that there ought to be some sort of contribution to the offset loss of revenue. I get that. I mean, businesses pay rent, they have insurance. This would be basically expanding their tabletop capacity. But I'd like to have more information from the restaurants and business owners about what a reasonable fee structure may look like. And I'm not sure if that is possible to do right at this very moment. But looking at the proposed schedule, in my opinion, charging $150 for year one, is that like expectation setting? Because that's a real nominal number, and I would think we just do away with that. And then we look at phasing in the fees concurrent with our timeline to economic recovery. But I think we need some feedback from the business community of what, if they do a parklet and they add 2 tables out there, how much revenue those tables generate and what would be a fair compensation model. Because the intent here is to shift space to people-oriented spaces and less to car-oriented spaces. I also think we need to think about the fact that a lot of these spaces, if I'm not mistaken, we don't charge parking at nights and on weekends. Doesn't it cut off at like 5 or 6 o'clock, the meters? So there ought to be some consideration for that as well. But where I'm at on it is, I think we need to hear a little bit more from the business community, but I also want to get these standards moving forward because I don't want there to be a gap in the emergency ordinance expiring in December and we don't have something in place. We have to set expectations for people. And so that's sort of where I'm at, Mayor.
Yes, so just to put some things in perspective, because I have met with people from our restaurant community, they are now paying much higher wages to acquire talent. One, not only that, they are also challenged because they cannot hire enough people to run their restaurants at full capacity. We don't know when that is going to change. So right now, restaurants are grappling with paying, they're in arrears for their rent. They are paying $15 an hour and more for their talent. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's a new reality. The margins are thin to begin with. And then you don't have enough people to staff up. One restaurant owner told me he is in dire shape because he cannot find the talent and stay open at times he would normally open. So this is, when you're grappling with all of this and you see, okay, a parklet or a streetery or pedlet could bring more customers, but I'm going to have to pay $3,000 more in 3 years. And I'm already struggling because I've got to pay 9 months rent and back. I think that could definitely impact somebody's mindset on what they would want to invest in. And also, I thought the whole point in this program was to create a new sense of public realm. We see cities across the country shutting down streets and they're putting dining outside. We're not talking about shutting down streets, although Bill does do that on some weekends, which has been very successful. What we're talking about is re-envisioning our public realm. And I think we have to, if that's what we're doing, then we have to make that a priority and not just look at cost recovery. As it stands, I can't support the 50% and 100% fee at this time because I think it sends the wrong message to our restaurant community. And I think that many of them who are struggling mightily it would impact their decision.
In this trend, I hear those concerns. I in part respectfully disagree because if this is a new permanent program, we have to think beyond COVID. It tends to think beyond COVID. So right now, industry is struggling with back rent and hiring. 2-3 years from now, where are we going to be then? And that is the point. And I agree, it's shifting from cars to people-oriented spaces, but we charge cars to use the space. And if businesses are using the space to turn tables, then there ought to be some sort of contribution to it as well. That is my opinion. But I don't know what a fair amount is. It sounds like other cities that are doing this are charging fees because when we're hearing from staff is these amounts were peer reviewed. So I don't know how we say this is a permanent program, but no fees for perpetuity. I mean, again, I want to hear from the business community about what a model looks like. And I don't think we should charge anything year one. $150 is nominal. We shouldn't do it. Maybe 50% in year two, 100% year three is not the way to go, but we have to come up with a workable model. I saw Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, I did not say to do this in perpetuity. I said, I'm not comfortable right now knowing what our restaurant owners are going through, setting the stage for a $3,000 annual fee 3 years from now. So I'm not comfortable with that as it is in the current state. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with COVID. We've seen it come and go and come and go. And that's created a sense of uncertainty and a sense of insecurity among business owners. So I'm just trying to be sensitive to that. I'm not saying there shouldn't be some cost recovery, but as I said, I'm not comfortable at this time with that dollar amount.
Councilmember Knight, I saw you had your hand up.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking back at the presentation. I thought, given the timing, I think a major focus of this is the funding opportunities, right? I thought what we're trying to do is, given the timing of this, to bring this forward. I think it is fair to try to come up with what the cost structure is or price structure would be. But it seems to me we need to come up with what the plan would be, and hopefully this will be one of the options we're looking at for ARPA funding. I thought that was, some of this conversation is really down the road. What we need to be trying to figure out is that we have something in place that is at a appropriate place to be able to put in front of the council and staff and the public to be used or to be granted through ARPA funding. That's what I'm hoping for. And so I think there needs to be a fair and appropriate cost structure, but I think we need to go after ARPA funding. And so that will deal, for a pilot program, that will deal with a lot of these cost issues in the near future and middle future of our, for the city.
1 second, Councilmember Branch. To your point, Councilmember Knight, I almost feel like we're talking about the same thing, but in different ways, and we may be sending the wrong message. I thought the point of this was to say, all of these good things we learned from using our public spaces in COVID, let's make them permanent. In 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10, 20 years. If this is a permanent program, I think we have to take our COVID hats off for a minute and think of what the permanent program is going to look like. We were very clear last time we talked about this at the council that we didn't want to say your streetlets are pilots. This is permanent. You can take over this space permanently. And if it's going to be permanent, then I think we have to both assess immediate need and how we make this a sustainable project moving forward. And so there may be an opportunity to find ways to use emergency money for the next couple of years. But I also think the message we send has to be is you can use this public space forever, basically, until someone comes in and changes the rules. And here's what the program is. And it needs to be simple and easily articulated. And I do think there has to be some sort of fee structure. And Councilmember Branch, go ahead.
My question was around, we built the current streeteries at our own costs using whatever funds. Going forward, who builds these? Who's responsible for them? Does the fee cover that, or is that an additional cost?
So for the $500,000 that you all approved for us to go ahead and build streeteries, we do have the capacity to cover the existing ones that are out there plus additional. And we've also spoken with Bill at the DRA about those other businesses that may be interested in participating, and we would have the funding to support all of those as well. As far as future ones that none of us are aware of now, I think we would still have some capacity, but it is probably something that we would ultimately need to look at depending on how many businesses would want to be a part of this in the future too.
Okay. So as of today, if we were to put a program in place with no fee structure, we, the city, are covering the entire cost of design and implementation of a streetery to a business to help them through this time, COVID, at no cost to them. So I guess I'm trying to find that balance. And council and chair, Mr. Chair, you made a valid point that I'm starting to try to think, what about post-COVID? Because that's where, I think we're slowly starting to get towards post-COVID. In 3 months, 2022 will be here. Actually, less than 3 months. 2022 will be here. So where are we post-COVID? And I think we just got to figure out, from what I'm hearing from the mayor, her issue is the amount. It's not that we're charging, it's the amount. Is that correct? So I guess the conversation has to be, because while here I did a quick Google search and I saw in DC where they have these streeteries, their fee looks like it's $100, but they're building their own. One restaurant spent $10,000, one spent $30,000. That was them doing. But we got to think about, we're using public dollars for a public space to help a private business to have a public good, in a sense. What is that number? I think staff, you've given us the data. I think as a committee is not something that we will probably solve today, but I think it's something that we really need to chew on and figure out and see what other data we need. Maybe if staff can share with us your data sets of the other cities that you looked at, what are their fees, at what point are they charging? Because what I looked at in one of them, they're charging their fees a couple years out, and give us that to kind of gnaw on before we can really, I think, give a good recommendation from this committee. But I think it's long term. I have my own personal thoughts about streeteries, and part of that's because no streets downtown are built equal. But that's neither here or there. That's not on the table today.
What I'm hearing, and to clarify my own comments, I started by saying I think we're only getting half of the equation. I think we need to hear from the restaurant and small business community about what a fair fee structure would look like. I think we're all on the same page that nothing would apply at least until several years from now. But what that looks like, I almost feel like we're trying to do an apples for apples exchange, parking for tables in the street, and it's not an equal exchange. Parking's based on demand, and we're going to get the money back, so to speak, from the revenue on tables through the sales tax. And so what I think we should do is we absolutely need to get moving on a permanent program. We need to signal to the public and to the business community that we want your tables and outdoor dining to stay in the city of Raleigh permanently post-COVID. Here are the options for how to do it. Here are the resources available. Make it as simple as possible. The only piece we don't have is moving forward, not next year or 2 years, 3 years from now, what will the fee structure look like? So I think we need to pause on that piece of it and convene some business owners and maybe do a little more digging on the structure, not looking it to be like a one-for-one replacement for parking spaces. But in the meantime, I think we should move forward on the standards for design, the menu of options. So folks, I don't want there to be a gap in the emergency is over. There's no permanent program in place. What do we do with tables outside? So is that a workable model for staff if we can move forward with the standards and pause on the fees right now and get some more feedback from the community, business community?
That's Chairman Melton, if that is the pleasure of the committee, we certainly can take that approach. And what I might propose is that, kind of as you indicated, we can move forward with other aspects of the program, setting aside the fee, and we can come back and do a little bit more work. It sounds like this committee wants us to do some additional evaluation on that point. We can bring that back to you at a future at a future meeting.
My only concern is that if folks don't know what to anticipate for a fee, that they may not participate in the program. And so what we may need to say is that year one and year two, there are no fees, and that fees would be assessed year three based on a collaborative model. That may be the message we need to send. Councilmember Knight, I see your hand up.
I think this all should be for staff to be directed towards preparing this to be ready to apply for ARPA funding for it. And I would think to get ARPA funding, you do need to have a cost structure in place. And so I think it should be focused on what we think is a fair, appropriate cost structure. Not that we're going to get cost recovery, but just what it costs. And then that's what I hope we would probably, the majority of the council would approve to move forward and apply for ARPA funding. Because there's a time frame that we're working under to do that. So that's what I think we need to be focused on, the most likely and immediate way to get funding for this program, robust program, and get it ready to do that.
Mayor.
Yeah, I agree that there is a sense of urgency here. And I think we need to move forward with standards and what we can move forward with. What I would like to ask is if Bill King could do some type of, I don't want to say survey, but certainly reach out to downtown business owners, perhaps bring together a meeting that would talk about, here's the potential fees. What would your interest be in this? I mean, if we set this up and people don't apply, we've defeated the whole purpose. So we need a reality check from the people who would actually be doing this. And while we are using public money, these restaurants are going to have to make investments as well with furniture, tables, chairs. If you look at what, say, Bittersweet has done, theirs is very different than what Raleigh Times has done. And if you look at what Garland has done, that's different from others as well. So they're going to want to put their own spins on this. So they are going to be making an investment in this. So with all the other things that they have going on, my question is, will they be willing to make that investment knowing that they're going to be paying $3,000 a year 2 years from now? And so if that could be kind of part of the discussion, Bill, I think that that could be very helpful in helping us move forward. However, as of today, I think we need to move forward on the standards and other things so we can set that everything in place and be ready. Because that's going to take, what, probably about 4 to 6 weeks minimally?
Yeah,
Scott?
I agree. And I hear Councilmember Knight on the ARPA funding, and if we are able to use some of that in the short term, but I just want to remind everyone that for those 4 magical weeks in June where we thought COVID was over, we took up this work to say, these are all the temporary things we learned in COVID, now let's make them permanent. So what we're doing today is not, this is a COVID fix. This is a permanent, the city of Raleigh wants to encourage outdoor dining forever fix, period. So we are unfortunately still stuck in the COVID mess for right now. So now we're sort of wearing 2 hats. But what we need to do is move forward on these permanent ordinance changes, the design standards, and message that clearly, while we're also working collaboratively with the business community on what a fair fee structure may be. So what I'm hearing is setting the expectation that we want to help you get out of this mess. There will be some fee at some point in time, not in the near future, not year 1, year 2, maybe year 3. Work with us on what that fee is in a workable model so that you do invest in these outdoor dining areas. And so I think that's where we're at. And so I guess I would make a motion. I'll move then that we move forward with the design standards and that we work with the Downtown Raleigh Alliance on coming up with a fee structure.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor? All right, that was unanimous. Do you have what you need, staff?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I think we're clear on the desires of the committee, Chairman Melton. I do want to just take a quick moment to acknowledge our Deputy City Attorney, Brandon Poole, to just kind of clarify the next steps just procedurally so you can have that information. Brandon, do you want to make a quick comment on that front?
Sure, Evan. So what we're thinking of in terms of the text changes to incorporate these changes would be to pull a lot of the prescriptive details that are currently within the city code out regarding the outdoor program out and allow it to be a broader delegation to the city manager to allow staff to come up with more agile and responsive standards on an annual basis or even on less than that, depending on what circumstances are. And we would see that coming back to council likely at the December meeting. I think to some of the earlier questions, it would establish, we would think, if it follows the way most of our code drafting works, the two fees that Whitney described previously, but those would be punted to the fee schedule, and clearly for FY22, those would be set at $0 within the fee schedule. And then the conversation that DRA and Bill would be having can inform what that would look like going forward in subsequent budget years. But the main thing I think coming out is just to go ahead and get our Urban Design Center and Whitney's group moving on getting the guidelines out and getting the community educated on those. And then we'll put the framework in place to allow those to go into effect on January 1 at a later council meeting, with it not coming back to the committee, but going to the full council as an ordinance for adoption.
And I want to make sure that we focus on Mr. King's comments too about making it easy to understand, simple to apply. It's as simple as possible. Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, one quick thing, because I know a lot of our focus has been on streeteries in downtown, but this ordinance would be citywide, correct? Okay.
That's correct, Councilman.
So in saying that, I'm sure in the ordinance, we will have to state certain streets just won't be, you can't use. And we just got to make sure that that's clearly defined. And I know that's by speed and everything, but there's some streets, I'm sorry, they may be marked 35, but I'm not sure we still want to have a streetery on it. Okay.
Councilmember Knight?
Yeah, a legalistic question, but it does have impact. A parklet. I'm trying to get the difference between a parklet and a streetery. It says a parklet is open to the public at all times. Can a business make money off of that space? And when we say at all times, does that mean 24 hours or does it mean something else?
So businesses aren't typically making money off of a parklet. The only parklet that currently exists is outside of Deco and Black Dollar downtown. So it's much like a park where you can go read the newspaper, have a cup of coffee, socialize. The businesses are not serving any patrons within that parklet. They're just essentially creating a community space.
And for Brandon, just think about the at all times, because that in some parts of town that may not be, I think of at all times meaning 24 hours. And then the streetery, it says for the patrons of that business during its hours of operation. So outside of their hours of operation, is it open to the public or is it cordoned off?
It is. It essentially becomes an extension of the sidewalk. So again, I'll use Bittersweet as an example because it was brought up earlier. When Bittersweet isn't open, the platform is essentially there. People can walk by, walk on it, but they aren't providing service to anyone at that time. They're not open.
And they can sit there or stand there if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor?
Just real quick, the motion that was approved, just a point of clarification, do we have standards that we have already, like specific standards we have already approved? Or are we developing them along the way, and will we be getting feedback on those standards?
Mayor, Whitney, I'm sorry, you're free to take it. It's something you've been doing. If you want to jump in, I'll fill in if you miss anything.
So what is currently in code is just about sidewalk seating. Obviously, streeteries did not exist previously. Parklets have existed, but really these design standards are essentially brand new. And several departments have weighed in on comments, and also these have been shared with the DRA for their feedback as well, and that has been collected as well.
Okay, so DRA has provided feedback on the standards that we're considering.
I know they had it, and then they were sharing it directly with the Urban Design Center, so I don't know if Bill can speak to if any specific comments were shared.
We did share some feedback with the Urban Design Center, so I believe we have shared that directly with them, and we have seen those.
Thank
But
you.
to be clear, the motion, we didn't approve standards today. We approved staff moving forward with developing the standards so that we can get moving on it while also working on coming up with a fee structure.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to make sure that was clear in the motion. Got it.
Yeah, I just wanted clarity on that. Thank you, Councilmember Melton.
Do you have anything else for today? I know we've got a work session in about 30 minutes. We usually try to wrap up and give everyone time to switch over. Does anybody have anything else? No, Mr. Raleigh, is there anything else?
Nothing from staff, Chairman Melton. We are good to go.
Well, Mr. King, thank you for being the de facto 5th member of our committee today and for contributing so much. It's appreciated. And I'll see everybody else in about 30 minutes. Meeting adjourned.